Fallout New Vegas, a 2011 video game by Obsidian Studios and published by Bethesda, has a reputation for being the better Fallout, at least compared to Fallout 4 or the literal war crime that is Fallout 76. I won't get into the Fallout 3 was shit versus Fallout 3 was good debate because, frankly, I think that history will decide which one will be forgotten and which one is New Vegas. My focus is more on the thematics and through lines on the questions raised specifically in the one game I'm talking about today. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about New Vegas and my personal interpretation of the various themes and storylines within the game. I did 3 whole-ass playthroughs before making this video, and I still hadn't seen everything before I had to stop and write this damn script because Johnny Guitar and Big Iron were haunting my nightmares like the ghosts of country past. Maybe my takes are hot, maybe they're cold as ice, maybe no one cares, but this is the stuff I want to discuss, and I figured this would be a good video to yeet onto the world as my first actual analysis on this channel, and no one can stop me or my Blue Yeti. Part 1. The Mojave's Players. The Mojave Desert, a place I didn't know was real until a few years ago. I'm not American, don't blame me for not knowing your geography. Is chiefly controlled by 3 major players. To the west, you have the New California Republic. To the east, you have Caesar's Legion. And in the center, you have New Vegas and its robotic protectors. Much of the Mojave is lawless land with dots of civilization, and in those you have the raiders, great khans, fiends, and powder gangers being the chief ones, each raiding for survival. It's a region defined by conflict. You fight the raiders fight everyone. New Vegas and the NCR are in a deeply tenuous truce. Before the Courier came onto the scene, there had already been several major battles as part of the campaign by both the NCR and Caesar's Legion to take the Mojave and incorporate it into their respective empire. In short, here are the big players. Caesar's Legion. Fascistic Rome LARPers. They specialize in brutal melee combat and hold deeply reactionary views with punishments to match. Despite what one may think of them, they're not dumb. In fact, the conversation you have with Caesar is quite interesting, bringing up flaws with democratic system and referring to the concepts of thesis and antithesis. And since they speak Latin quite correctly, it's assumed there's at least some form of education. They're probably just enough to know how to say, "Then I bid you Wale." Of course, the intellectualism kind of falls apart when you hear their vision for the future.
It means a nationalist, imperialist, totalitarian, homogenous culture that obliterates the identity of every group it conquers. Long-term stability at all costs. The individual has no value beyond his utility to the state, whether as an instrument of war or production.
The New California Republic. Styling itself after American democracy, the NCR is expanding itself and attempting to reclaim as much of lost America as possible. And while I don't believe it claims to be a continuation of the United States, they clearly do see themselves as a successor state of sorts. They're somewhat corrupt and authoritarian, with military police marching around New Vegas, and those among it whom you help out tend to lose things to pay you back. And yeah, they're paying you for a service, but losing a few items is a form of corruption. During President Kimball's speech, you actually do explicitly have Brahmin ranchers being some of the few people there who aren't soldiers, so clearly the rich have a bit more power in this society. And, its presidents have served entire lifetimes, basically, because of a lack of term limits, and sure, it's not awful, but the people who deride it often call it bloated, weak, and inefficient. And it's a little hard to say they're wrong.
I don't have time to discuss all the different aspects of the NCR with you, but if you want it all in a nutshell, the NCR is progress. If you wander around the wasteland, you'll find all sorts of tribes, villages, and such where people spend most of their time trying to survive. The NCR gives its citizens a shot at something more. We have laws, currency, healthcare, government, all the things that were lost. It's not perfect, but it's worth protecting, which is why we also have the largest military in existence.
House. Ruled by a man who is over 200 years old and kept alive more or less because he's rich enough to tell death to fuck off, New Vegas is under the Night Watchman rule of House and the Securitrons. As long as the families of New Vegas respect him, he respects their autonomy. In other words, he's more or less a laissez-faire capitalist who wants the company responsible for security and keeping New Vegas independent. He's an industrialist, a capitalist, guillotine fodder, but he's also got the strongest army of all of them, at least when its full potential is unlocked.
I prefer the term autocrat. I would rule as the chief executive. I would not answer to a board of directors or any other entity. Nothing to impede progress. If you want to see the fate of democracies, look out the windows.
And then there's you, the wild card. Courier 6, shot in the head and left for dead. The wild card who can join anyone or no one. You can tip the balances or forge the head, leaving Mr. House a dead or dying mess, driving the NCR and annihilating Caesar's Legion once more at Hoover Dam. Whatever politics you hold, whatever ideals you envision, whoever you want to carry into the future with you, that is all secondary to the ideal of total freedom.
No, I didn't mean that. Who needs their support? The Securitrons will be all the support you need. What I meant is, you should get to know these tribes and decide which ones you like. You know, shape the future of Vegas. Or, if a tribe is nasty, or going to be a problem, go ahead and exterminate it.
And yeah, you probably knew that already. It's been almost 10 years since this game came out. But, I bring up the faction primers for a reason. First of all, a mental refresher, and second of all, they represent something very important for the themes of New Vegas. History, power, and obsession, and how the three collide. Part 2. Power and History.
Just as my namesake campaigned in Gaul before he crossed the Rubicon, so have I campaigned and will cross the Colorado.
I would argue that the NCR and Caesar's Legion are, at their core, more or less guided by the same principle. They both want to spread a kind of life that existed before the war. It's idealized, but it's what they believe existed before the war. Now, the NCR and Caesar's Legion are not comparable in terms of ideology and goals or ideals. One of them are explicit fascists, and the other one are somewhat illiberal Democrats. That's not exactly comparable. But they still share an obsessive nature when it comes to their relationship with power and history. The NCR is explicitly stated to be devoted to old world principles, modeled itself heavily off of America, and wants everyone to share in this democracy. Of course, its intentions around Hoover Dam are also stated to be more or less imperialistic in nature, as Freesiders do not want the NCR around, and some characters express the viewpoint that the NCR more or less only wants Hoover Dam for its electrical production. They've started sharecropping farms, they've moved military in. It's pretty imperialistic in nature. Caesar's Legion is similarly guided by a mission to bring peace, order, and stability to the wasteland of Mojave, but through completely different means. They want to bring back the glory of the past, but instead of wanting to recreate the pre-war conditions where democracy was the order of the day, they are, again, fascists. I could do an entire other video on Caesar's ideology and its mirrors to real-life fascist movements. They want to grind anything disordered beneath their slave-made armored heels, and they don't even hide the imperialistic goal of their conquests. Caesar tells you up front that his goal is to annihilate the Mojave's culture and subsume it into his own idealized version of Roman discipline. But in the end, both of them draw from history to justify their power. Both of them want to impose their ideals on others. Caesar's Legion is obviously the much more direct version of that, with it literally trying to bring back Rome. But they are outsiders who try to justify their power with history. Then you have House. the man who lived before the Great War and made ghouls look like photoshopped Instagram models by comparison. Like, he couldn't even install a shaving module into his life support pod. Just personal grooming, man. Ugh. He has little concern for history. In fact, he tries to justify his actions not through history and its successes, but through the failures of previous times. There is, to House, no idealized time to call back to. The idea for him is to look into the future, to a path that hasn't been taken and is uniquely suited for Las Vegas, a state that ensures the security of its citizens for the price of their political voices, while also giving them free rein to have sex, do drugs, gamble, and more. He's old money, quite literally, and has begun the transition to a new stage. Like the feudal lord becoming the conglomerate owner, or perhaps the conglomerate owner becoming a feudal lord. And then you have the wild card, someone who has no history and yet can take power. In fact, the Courier, until the DLCs, has pretty much no personal history to speak of. There's nothing he can say or do or draw from, because he's a courier, born and raised in the wasteland, to travel to and from areas in the wasteland. Yes, he can obtain power, and despite the fact me and my friends joke about anarcho-courierism, when I was first explaining the script idea, we were discussing it, and we couldn't really find an ideology about him. You know, there's democracy, there's fascism, there's capitalist authoritarianism, and there's nothing for the courier. And yeah, the wildcard path does have strong overtones of anarchism. After all, the last quest is called No Gods, No Masters, but what does it take to achieve that? A robot army rolling its way through the streets under your command? The potential slaughter of, or alternately the tolerating of, warlordish cliques of casino gangs? That's nothing. That's not anarchistic. That's not precisely dictator. It's nothing. It's a wild card. The major difference between the house path and the wild card path is the wild card path seems to leave it open to interpretation if the courier actually rules New Vegas or lets it develop on its own. But, isn't that cool? You have 4 paths. 1, a nostalgia for democratic pre-war world that is being used to justify sending armies into the Mojave. Its opposite, using the glories of bygone eras to justify conquest of murder. 2 different uses of history, 2 different ideals vying for power. Then you have a path where history is an afterthought compared to the preservation of power. And while that power did come from historic sources, it's not like House is trying to bring Robco back and recreate capitalism as existed pre-war. He wants new wasteland, a new era, a nation the likes of which didn't exist in the old world. Corporate rule through gangs and a night watchman state. But he's still a remnant of power from the old world, from history, readapting and readjusting itself to maintain hegemony in the new world. And then, opposing all of those, is a Wastelander native who simply wants to kick everyone else out. And nothing else is concretely known of their motivations. Power without concrete ideological goals behind its seeking. And those are basically, in my mind, the 4 paths and how they deal with history and power and their interrelation. Was it too painful? I mean, roughly speaking, seems like you have historically justified power in both light and full-fat editions, a non-ideological path in the sense the courier does whatever the courier does with his power, and that serves as a way to kick everyone out, and a new state that is a transformation of old historical power. Each of those factions is just an exploration of those concepts. Of course, this is all broad stuff. I didn't want this video to hit 25,000 words. We're just under 10,000 here, folks. I could go into the specifics of each faction and how it represents the ideals I assign to them, but since I want to pass my anthropology courses, I need to devote at least some time to stuff other than this video. So instead of dropping a feature film on you, take this. Each of the factions has its own interpretation of the history and the world and its ideas about power. They all have their reasons and desires for what they're doing. It's not like Caesar is evil and tenting his fingers while laughing at slaves, at least not all the time. He has an ideological reason, a concrete ideological reason for his actions. It's an ideological stance I find deeply wrong, but it's a stance that can be defended and is defended in-game by Caesar. Normally before I blow his fucking head off. And that's what I find so good about video game narratives. When you give the player choices, you can't really make an effective, good story without every choice having some weight to it. Pros and cons and ideals and wrongs. If Caesar just said, "I'm evil, that's why," I doubt few people play his run outside to get some cool items, which don't matter because the game ends right when you finish the main quest. If the NCR didn't have the Bitter Springs Massacre or didn't shell the entirety of Boulder City to rubble, they'd so obviously be the good guys that it'd be kind of boring. House has legitimately united the tribes, but makes his disdain for them quite clear. He thinks that Wastelanders can't thrive, only survive. They need a strong guiding hand. If he was a generic evil corporate guy, he'd be boring. But Obsidian is smart. They knew what they wanted to do. And that was to make a conflict that was many-sided, where players could feel as though their choice wasn't comically good or comically evil. Regular literature can't really do that, you know? Yeah, you can have stories written where you root for a specific side, but you can't actively work to make the side you like win. And so the writers of more static media are forced to make choices as to where the story goes. You can't start reading from Saruman's perspective in Lord of the Rings and help him come to power, no matter how much you agree with his industrialization schemes. Each of the DLC, in their own way, expand on the themes of history or power, through differing perspectives or incarnations. Dead Money focuses itself on the obsessions with the past that can damn individuals. Old Road Blues is about the locking away of the past and the issues that can present. Honest Heart showcases the conflict between a desire for peace and a desire for security, and the way that the past haunts the present and future. And finally, Lonesome Road, I think, gives the game's answer to questions raised in the main campaign. So, let's talk about them. Part 3. Ghosts, Ghouls, and Finding God in a Casino.
But getting to it, that's not the hard part. It's letting go.
So, before I go off about how Dead Money is an absolutely great DLC for an absolutely great game, I want to address DLC order. Because in New Vegas, the order does really matter. The first time I played this game, I did them completely out of order because I didn't know there was an order. I got the game on Steam, all the DLC at once. I just played them as they interested me. I was completely lost when I met Ulysses, because I did Lonesome Road first. So this is how I believe the DLC make the most sense. It is release order, yeah, but it is an 11-year-old game, and if you buy it, you get all the DLC together now. So, let's go. Dead Money, Old Road Blues, Honest Hearts, and finally, Lonesome Road. I don't think Honest Heart needs to be there. You could swap it with Old Road Blues if you wanted, but I think Dead Money must be first, and Lonesome Road must be last. Cool? Cool. Dead Money follows the story of the Sierra Madre Casino, which opened up the day the bombs dropped, and whose corner-cutting construction crew, God, that took so many takes to say, installed dangerous equipment that now coats the entire place in the cloud, a toxic mist that can and will kill you. Our cast is as such: Dean Domino, a ghoul who's been there since day one; Christine, a mutilated and mute woman who needs like 1 billion hugs; and Dog, a super mutant who wants to eat everything he sees; and God, Dog's split personality who's obsessed with control; and Father Elijah, the man who brought you here. I won't do a full plot summary, that wouldn't help anyone, but the gist is as such. You and 4 others, 2 of them sharing a single body, are stuck here. You all came to the Sierra Madre for a reason, and Elijah exploited that and put a bomb collar around your neck. If you die, everyone else dies. If you succeed, everyone else succeeds. There's something called the Curse of the Sierra Madre, in which everyone who goes inside vanishes. Cool? Cool. The plot summary isn't important because it more or less exists as a vehicle for the characters. Characters fully drive the story, and their obsessions drive the characters. Dog is a broken man, a super mutant, who's felt the loss of the Master from Fallout 1 strongly. He wants someone to follow, anyone to follow, and Elijah has stepped in to fulfill this role. To keep God away, he self-harms to the point of keeping a bear trap closed around his arm all times. Self-harm to keep away God? Jesus, that sounds so edgy. Jesus fucking Christ. Okay. God wants to keep Dog safe, and himself obviously safe, and has taken to, quite literally, caging himself away in order to maintain control. You can switch between the personalities. Both of them want different things, but ultimately, their story's realization comes to an end, and you choose something. Either hunger wins, the control freak wins, or they realize together that they are the reflection of the same being. Christine used to be the girlfriend of Veronica, a woman in the Mojave, but they are forcibly broken up, and she's never forgiven the person, Elijah, for that. And so she becomes obsessed in her quest for revenge, stalking Elijah over vast distances, and coming to the conclusion that his crimes are so great, he needs to die, not just for her sake, but for the sake of everyone. She wants him dead, and will gladly herself die to achieve that. Dean Domino's a cunt. I don't like him. Okay, so basically, he wanted to steal the Sierra Madre's treasures. He introduced Sinclair, the founder of the Sierra Madre, to a woman named Scarlet. He went head over heels, and the Sierra Madre was more or less created to celebrate Scarlet towards the end. But Dean was blackmailing Scarlet with the rumors of addiction and abuse and what have you, typical Hollywood stuff, making sure she'd stay in the plot. He's a smarmy man who thinks he's got it all figured out, but the reality is he's too blinded by the treasure he imagines to realize that Sinclair knew about his plan and set up the vault that contains all the treasures he seeks to become his grave. Elijah wants the technology of the Madre. Inspired by its slogan of "Begin Again," he's willing to do anything, leave piles of body in his wake to get at the Madre. His intentions, if you side with him through a series of events that I frankly never did because I couldn't be arsed to remember all the steps, is to use the ghosts, holograms with the abilities to fire lasers, to exterminate all opposition, to spread the cloud beyond its border, to give the wasteland a new start. All these obsessions drive their characters. To get the good ending for the DLC, you need to be smart, understand them all, make sure that you can make them give up their obsession. You can talk Dean Domino down. He walks away from the Madre after 200 years of planning. You can help Christine, make her realize that her life isn't worth giving up just to destroy Elijah. You can talk to God and Dog and make them both give up their desires. One of them wants to be controlled by a master, the other wants utter control, and they merge to become a completely new person. But this ending requires listening to each character, understanding their entire story, and keeping the team together. It's much easier to just be an asshole. You can send the claustrophobic Christine up the elevator alone and in the dark. You can threaten Dean with breaking his legs and using his body as conductor if he doesn't do as you ask. You can force Dog or God to do whatever you want through bribes and coercion. If you want, you can make everyone hate you. and it's so much easier to do. It's often 1 or 2 dialogue checks over speech and science checks. The side quests convince people to help you. In your quest to get treasures, it's quite simple to make everyone you need to work with hate you, to make your life harder and harder for yourself because you just want the treasure. The courier can become just as greedy, as obsessive over the treasures of the Madre as anyone else. If you try to take all the gold, you're too slow to avoid the holographic cards. If you dig too deep into the history, you end up sealed away. If you don't play it safe, if you want too much, if you let yourself become wholly and solely focused on racking up points or getting the treasures of the Madre, and let's face it, this is a video game. The imaginary points are kind of what we're supposed to want. The Sierra Madre is there to chew you up, spit you out, let the ghost people drag you kicking and screaming into the darkness. If you're lucky, your last moments will be used to make a hologram. Your voice will echo through the Madre, haunting the dead city. Everyone has a history. Everyone is motivated by their history, and how the history of the world has affected them. They've allowed themselves to become obsessive over it. Much like the factions of the base game, everyone has their justifications and ideals, but unlike the factions, you can talk them out of their obsessions. If you don't, fires burning inside them will destroy them to a man. Yes, it's a little hard, but it's doable. When you talk the NCR away from Hoover Dam, they promise they'll return. When Caesar's legion is dissuaded from continuing their assault, they promise they will be back again. There's no stopping ideology, not on the level of nations and armies, without violence. But people can be reasoned with. Their histories can be contextualized. Their motives challenged, and individuals can let go. Find a new path for themselves. God/dog can walk into the wastes, knowing nothing of his life save that he has you to thank for it. He finds his way, a way he would have never found without you. Christine can find new purpose as the protector of the Madre, keeping others away from the dead city, making sure they don't make the same mistake both she and you made. Dean Domino can give up his 2-century-long heist, his life uncertain, his future unclear, but alive and ready to see what there is to find in the world. And Elijah, unable to let go, unable to be reasoned out of his convictions, finds himself dead or locked in the vault, waiting for old age to find him. He went to the Sierra Madre, hoping to find its technology, and others came. Those who tried to find him, tried to find a master, tried to find safety, tried to find treasures, all followed, not fully knowing in the end what they'd find. But, you know.
Finding it, though. That's not the hard part. It's letting go.
Before you go, we hope you've enjoyed your stay. Farewells can be a time of sadness. Letting go, difficult. As a guest of the Sierra Madre, you know that truth more than anyone. Frederick Sinclair believed one's life could be made anew every day, that fortunes were more than the wealth in your hands. Love, life, family, those to care for, and those who will care for you. To those who know these joys, the Sierra Madre holds little they don't already have. Out in the world, beyond these walls, that is your chance to begin again. I hope you'll return in happier times. Until then, the Sierra Madre and I will hold you in our hearts. Wait a moment.
Part 4. How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Deeply Unethical Science on the Human Body.
Are those penises I see wriggling on its feet?
Trofim Lysenko was a Soviet agriculturalist who obsessed himself with the ideas of Lysenkoism, his specific brand of a genetic theory known as Lamarckism, which posits the evolution of organisms isn't genetic selection, but instead wholly environmental pressures that can cause rapid change within a generation or two. Lysenko believed that this revolutionary science would allow him to, quote, make the barren fields of the Caucasus green. He was adored by Stalin, who both mandated Lysenkoism as proper socialist theory and punished those who disagreed, which was anyone who stood the basics of Darwin. He was a man completely consumed by pathological science. That is, he believed he was right. That was just a matter of time until he was proven to be so. Results in the present be damned. After countless attempts that more or less failed, Lysenko was removed from his position after Stalin's death and quietly faded away. It took decades for Soviet agricultural science to fully recover. I bring up Trofim Lysenko because I think he would be a perfect member of the Big MT. The scientists of the Big Empty, from Dalla to Klein to Zero, are all victims of their own hype and success. People who believed so strongly in their science, they ended up becoming people who sought to bend reality to fit their theory, instead of changing theory to fit reality. For example, the Cazadors are clearly not docile, but anything to the contrary is simply not registered as correct. Any attempt to explain is just denied away. Klein is so caught up in his theories and science, he doesn't really register you as important till he can use you. Science, not the concept of testing and hypotheses, but as a philosophical concept, plays a huge role in this DLC. After all, everything in the Big Empty is a science experiment, ostensibly. From the personality cores in the sink to the lobotomites to you, the courier, everyone is an experiment. Even when you kill Mobius, he declares, "I've never died before, excited to see what it's like," as if he's just conducting a brand new test of something he's never done before. Except science occupies a weird role in this DLC. I'll be honest, this is a very hard DLC for me to talk about. On one hand, it's an incredibly fun romp through a world inspired by the sci-fi of the 50s and 60s, translated for a modern audience, with a lot of material that simply would not work outside the Fallout universe. On the other hand, simply put, I don't know what to think of this DLC. The problem is that it does, to an extent, fill the world of New Vegas with ideas that are interesting to explore. At the same time, it never lingers on or acts on those ideas with much action behind them. Dalla, for instance, could be a cool exploration of humanity, robotics, how disconnecting someone from their body doesn't remove their needs. But then the brain contradicts that, or simply, Dalla never admits it outside an admission of hypocrisy that goes nowhere. You could confront Klein on his deeply narrow viewpoint, on his idealism and fetishization of science, but everyone else in this think tank seems to share his ideals. Even Mobius ultimately wants to produce that which is good from science, and he's the DLC's villain. Also, part of me feels like that's part of the point. Science is never something wholly concrete. It's not something you can make a lot of 100% accurate statements about. You can say it is the attempt to gather and seek knowledge in an organized way, and that's really about it. I mean, Oppenheimer famously said of his own research into atomic weaponry,
"Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
And it's not like the research that Oppenheimer did was solely bad. Just look at nuclear power plants. Some of you may be watching video with the science he conducted. But that leads me to an idea that might be presented. That science as, again, the philosophical concept, seeking knowledge through experimentation and all that, that's not evil. It's not good, but no one in the pursuit of science, Klein or Mobius, neither of them are evil. They're not particularly good, but, you can find a use for most of the science in the DLC. Like, take, for example, the lobotomy procedure and its other organ removings. Yeah, it's not good. It produced the lobotomites, but is it bad? The Autodoc was able to do all that. Put artificial stuff in you, keep you going. It's being used for relative evil, but it's not in and of itself evil. It's like saying human organ transplants are evil because some people forcibly take organs. And what people do with knowledge and power is never the fault of knowledge. It's the fault of power. Big MT's think tank are exceptionally powerful, and they can use their knowledge to expand that power to control others in the most literal way possible, removing their brains. What we have are scientists who've lost their humanity, their empathy, their care, becoming self-absorbed, wanting to prove their own theories instead of find the truth, wanting to experiment for their own sake instead of the sake of mankind. They take science, they take knowledge, and corrupt the ideals behind those words for their own obsessive, pathological sake. It's pretty explicitly stated in the introduction that Big Empty used to be a place for all forms of science, and then it's turned to war. And, that's important, I think, that all of them turned their science, their knowledge, to war. Every single one of them is an Oppenheimer who is helping a war effort. And I guess sort of the climax of the DLC of Old World Blues comes with Mobius, who explicitly declares that he understands the danger of this pathological science. He understands what's happening, but he wants to protect the Mojave, so he's locked all the scientists in a continuous loop. They have no idea what's going on. They're locked in this loop, over and over and over again, doing the same things, producing new things that then go on, and they never leave the Big Empty. And I don't think they ever could leave the Big Empty, because they've lost themselves in their own pursuit, in their own distorted, corrupted pursuit of knowledge. And again, obsessiveness crops up again in the DLC of New Vegas, shown to be the driving force of antagonism, the driver behind cruelty and evil. Dead Money and Old World Blues both love talking about obsession and how obsessiveness leads to dark places. So we're starting to get a through line, something that connects the themes of all these DLC together. Let's see where it goes. Part 4. Bring unto me the little ones. Please don't. Please do not. Do not.
O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones.
Take drugs, kill a bear.
Honest Hearts focuses itself on faith, on the idea of dogmatic faith in something, and how it can dominate other people. The way this faith is used for power, the way it can be used to hurt, the way it can be used to bring comfort and peace. Central to its focus is the new Canaanite turned legate turned Christianized zealot, Joshua Graham. He leads a tribe who he is a foreigner to, the Dead Horses, against the Whitelegs, who seek to join Caesar's Legion, the very faction that Joshua's entire life was destroyed by. When the courier comes, they're introduced to a world that's unlike anything seen in the Mojave thus far, Grand sweeping vistas of land cut and intersected by great rivers, a desert teeming with life, where the touch of radiation isn't evident until you meet your first Yao Guai. It's beautiful, it's calming, it's honestly the nicest DLC to walk through. It's also the one where you become a direct accomplice to genocide against the White Legs. As it's described by Joshua and Daniel, the White Legs need to be destroyed. They know nothing but war, and they are thus perfect for Caesar's legion. And they are, at least within the text of the story, 100% right. Even the best ending possible for the DLC, evacuating the valley, still ultimately requires you to kill dozens of White Legs. They are that hell-bent on annihilating you. But the DLC gives you a choice. You can either destroy the White Legs or save the sorrows and dead horses. Of course, destroying the White Legs will lead to the other occurring, but there is a difference, guided by the ideologies of the two Canaanites. They are Christian missionaries, and they pull from two very different sources in the Bible. Daniel just wants peace. He wants to defend himself, not attack. In essence, he's the more directly Christ-like figure. Though he's still willing to pick up a gun in the heat of the moment, he's not going to pursue revenge or crush his enemies. So while it's not exactly turning the other cheek, it's a very different interpretation from Joshua's, who provided us with the opening quote of this section. Not the bear one, the murder children one. Joshua is still, at heart, a legate of Caesar's legion. He can deny it all he wants, talk about Caesar as if it's behind him, but the man is scarred. Deeply, truly, psychologically, and physically scarred. If he opens up to you, it's to talk about how deep the wounds go, how his punishment of being tarred and thrown down the Grand Alley is still being treated. He's in perpetual, constant agony. And that twists him a lot. It twists his faith. It twists its mind. It twists everything, combining the things he sought refuge in, Bible, and the people he once knew, and changes them both. He is, on a level, completely aware that he is changing all of this.
I want to take from them what they took from me, from my family. In this life, I want them to suffer. I want all of them to die in fear and pain. I want to have my revenge against him, against Caesar. I want to call it my own, to make my anger God's anger, to justify the things I've done.
In keeping with its theme of obsession, Honest Hearts introduces more than anything the trauma that can change a person and lead to these obsessions, and how moving on is never as easy as just passing a few speech checks. In essence, it's almost rebuttal of Dead Money in that way, isn't it? You can just convince the people in Dead Money out of things, and sure, it's hard, it takes active work on your part, but you can do it. But Joshua is someone who couldn't be talked out of it, admits that he didn't want to be talked out of it, not by his close friends at least. It took a stranger to come to help him commit actions just as evil as the ones he did under Caesar's legion to actually break him and make him reconsider, and even then, he doesn't change. On that point, one of the most interesting things to me is the preaching of Christianity in this DLC, as difficult as it is. Daniel becomes frustrated with himself for not explaining better the difference between Mary, Joseph, and the Father in the caves. He gets frustrated that the theology he's teaching lines up enough with the pre-existing beliefs that he can't just overwrite them. He doesn't want the Sorrows to believe in the Father in the caves. He wants them to believe in Jesus, and even a synthesis of the two, a natural blending of cultural beliefs, isn't something he wants. Joshua, in turn, helps the dead horses learn how to handle firearms, and the Sorrows can become more militant because of him. Honestly, I think it works. I think that given the past of Joshua as a legate of Caesar, as someone who wanted
Imperialist, totalitarian, homogenous culture that obliterates the identity of every group it conquers.
Having this subdued form of desiring complete conformity in this DLC works, and Daniel, the main preacher, isn't Caesar. He isn't trying to force people into a belief. He's just preaching. But isn't trying to convert people en masse to your own faith, have them abandon their spirituality in all forms in favor of yours. Isn't that just a desire for a single homogeneous culture? Even if you do talk Joshua out of murdering everyone, the ending slides still state that he, in his heart, is always angry, always waiting for a spark to ignite the flames, and sometimes shows mercy to the enemies of New Zion, as he once did because of you. And so, I think this DLC introduces to the previous ones an ambiguity. You can't just change someone. You need to actively desire the change itself, and even then, the change may be deeply unintended and have ripple effects. Joshua becoming less militant doesn't stop the Sorrows from becoming more militant, inspired by his past actions. Joshua will always be violent, because Caesar's legion and his fascistic black and white worldview has tainted him and his view on everything. He can't unmurder the presumably dozens of people he did. You can't take away that violent past, or the values he had instilled in himself as a result. He can't even do that because he doesn't want to. He's found himself in a situation where there are people who don't want him to. He's a hero because of his beliefs and actions to almost everyone. On Daniel's side, the people of the valley don't give up their beliefs easily, and Daniel can eventually just give up. He's trying to convert people to both the faith of Jesus and the path of pacifism and self-defense over revenge, but he can't manage either because the Sorrows and Dead Horses don't see him or Jesus as their saviors. Their savior is the ex-legate. The change you want to effect in the world is only as good as people are willing to listen. And so far, you've just been extremely lucky in being able to talk people down. And even talking people down can be a momentary thing, but even trying can have huge ripples in history. Part 5. The cutest robot ever. That is all that matters about this DLC. Eddie is the single best character. Fuck Caesar, fuck House, fuck the NCR and the Boomers and Doc Mitchell, and yes, when every goddamn person in the Mojave, this little robot is our Lord and Savior. Okay, so seriously, as much as I love Eddie, I don't like Lonesome Road. Now, this isn't because of its storytelling or because I feel like it's not introducing good themes or its gameplay is subpar or anything like that. Instead, I feel it's more just a disagreement between me and the developers as to how mechanics and backstory in RPGs should work. You see, I think that when you are making an RPG, you either establish the main character's past at the very start, or not at all. The reason I think this is because otherwise, you run the risk of what happens to me more often than I would like. You come up with a series of ideas for your character that then become abandoned because the game more or less railroads the past into you. To me, it throws the experience of building a character, of playing as a role, kind of out the window. And this might just be a me problem, but I also want to emphasize that it doesn't affect my thoughts on the DLC, you know? Like, I can read a story that I think does one or two things that I wouldn't do personally, but it's not going to change my reading of the text of that story too much. It introduces us, once again, and perhaps for the final time, to the themes of history. this time on both the most personal level between two people, as we may see in Elijah and Christine, and to the vast and cosmic level, such as the entire history of the world, what it means, and how it can be used. And all of this is done through two groups of people, the Marked Men and Ulysses. The Marked Men, remains of the NCR and Legion forces that passed through the Divide, are people who were, by storm and radiation and their own hatred, twisted and deformed into something between a feral ghoul and a murderous human. They clearly have a relatively strong society, since they're manufacturing weapons such as the Blade of the West, but we never get the chance to explore that society. Some of them dress up like NCR, others dress up like their former Legion. Mechanically, it's cool how you can tell the fighting style based on their dress. It's like the Raiders of the Mojave all over again. But no one really knows why they're alive outside of theory. I suppose no one lives long enough to find out. But Ulysses, our only source of information in this DLC, says they hold on to two things: their symbols and their hate. Not of each other, but of the Divide and of the situation they find themselves in. They hate living, they hate life itself seemingly, and have banded together as a result, clinging to symbols that gave them hope in their previous lives. So, symbols is a method of retaining sanity, clinging to the old, not adapting to what's around you, even if the reality is very stark and clear. That's pretty obvious. That's what the Marked are. And Ulysses reinforces this idea of clinging to symbols as a major theme, but in a different way. Remember, in the beginning, when I talked about how every faction had a different relationship to history? Well, in the playthrough most of this video's footage comes from, I was playing House. Ulysses was the character in any DLC to comment on it, to chastise me for choosing the ghosts of the old world. Which, seems hypocritical. The dude's a member of Caesar's Legion, or was a member of Caesar's Legion. They're the Rome-loving fucks who think the way forward is to regress into totalitarianism. It makes sense, though. He abandoned them. There was a home for him, made unintentionally by the courier, and annihilated unintentionally by the courier. So, he abandoned Caesar's Legion for that, and it was destroyed. So, the courier was apparently going through the Divide before it went kaboom. He brought supplies to this settlement, which grew and grew and grew into a nation outside the NCR or Vegas, and could possibly have been a competitor with them in its own right. But the courier brought something that awakened the giants and brought nuclear Armageddon to the new nation, which was unknowingly near a storage site for nukes. So the courier burned Ulysses' what is the plural? Ulysses? Write down in the comments. The courier burned Ulysses' chance at a home, a proper home. So he's been looking for you. Not to kill you, mind you, but to teach you, show you what you taught him. And apparently, that was that one man's impact on history can do far more than a nation clinging to old world ideals. He sees you as an agent of destruction, one bathed in the old world, unable to get past it. You brought destruction to the Divide with the old world tech. You rely on old world tech to get through the DLC, and if you include the main game, the entire game. You are of the old world, and you aren't unique in this. Caesar, House, the NCR, all of them are chasing an old world that Ulysses thinks no longer works in the post-nuclear world. Yeah, it might work for a time, but the Legion must always fight. The NCR is directionless, and House is run by a man so close to death that calling him a ghost is pretty fucking accurate. Ulysses poses to you a challenge. Simply convince him that you're more than the destruction of the Divide, more than an errand boy or girl for the past. Or kill him. Now, I mean, this was my house playthrough, so I was in the mindset of, how will I fuck everyone over? So I blew up the NCR in Caesar's Legion. It was pretty. Thing is, that's the choice Ulysses is ultimately asking you to make. It's the choice he made and sticks by, unless you can talk him out of the idea that you are an agent of destruction. If you get him to admit that you might just have something constructive, something that isn't just for the old world, then he's happy. Because that's what Ulysses wants. He's been trapped by the old world forever. The nukes that annihilated the world formed what he was born in. The Legion proclaiming Roman supremacy is what he fought for. The nuclear weapons that burned his one chance at a new home is what drew him to you. The old world clings to everyone, clings to the world. It's up to everyone to decide if they want to keep it hanging on their shoulders, or if they want to let go. Throughout all of the DLC, there's indications of letting go of the past being a main theme. It's explicitly stated in Dead Money that letting go is the hard part, but is needed to survive. Old World Blues has people who can't let go, trapped constantly in a loop of pathological science and self-superiority. Honest Hearts has people who can't let go of their anger, facing against those who can't let go of a dream to join people who can't let go of an idealized past. Ulysses wants the hard choice to be done. For everyone to let go. To realize that the world isn't old world symbols, but a new world that needs new symbols. Perhaps no symbols. His ending speech, the final message he gives, says as much. For the destruction of nuclear Armageddon to stop, men must change, and for men to change, their symbols must change. This isn't to say that the wildcard path is the canonical good ending. We don't know that. I don't think we ever will. I don't think we'll ever know the canon ending to New Vegas, nor if that ending is a good one. Bethesda doesn't want to touch it and is too concerned with making people pay for broken products to answer the myriad questions we may have. But instead, here's my conclusion. Part 6. Conclusions. So, first conclusion. This game got me into country. Second conclusion. New Vegas itself doesn't want to answer the question of who is and isn't right. If you follow the timeline of the DLCs in the main game and take the ending of Lonesome Road at face value, well, it's kind of said outright, isn't it? New Vegas doesn't care what or who you follow. It doesn't want to make you follow anyone. It just wants you to be sure that is the path you want to follow. Caesar's Legion, House, Wildcard, if you side with Elijah or pick your own greed or your own compassion, if you pick God or dog to flee or fight, it just wants you to answer this single question. Is that really your choice? Will you stand up, fight, and defend Caesar? Will you chance it on your own? Will you join the NCR? Will you help House maintain control? You say yes, but you have to reconsider. The game gives you multiple points where you can, in fact, reconsider. You're told outright when you're about to cross a line, join a faction for real and be marked as an enemy for all others. When you stand at Hoover Dam, the blood of dozens on your hands and the dreams of thousands shattered by your blade, are you truly happy with the ending you've made yourself? Is it really the ending that you wanted? I guess it's something only the player can answer. New Vegas isn't interested in answered. It's interested in asking. And that's our job. Of course, there's the second theme, one that kind of does guide us along as well, though I don't think that there's enough railroading in the game. You get too many choices. There's too many variables, so you can't really declare some singular moral answer to it. But it does give us our own lens for interpreting its factions, that of history and obsessiveness. Specifically, the obsessive nature people have towards history, trying to rebuild the old and preserve that which was, or even burning it down to restore what they think the old world was like. Throughout the game and DLC, you have countless examples of Factions and people trying to cling to the past, trying to preserve the past, trying to make the past new again. The ghosts of the Sierra Madre tell you over and over to let go. Joshua Graham uses his history as both a man of faith and a man of Caesar as justification for his violence. The big empty is history, locked away and allowed to stew. The minds of old, trapped in looping cycles over and over again, stuck with their own neuroses and lives to contend with and taint their project. And Ulysses wants to outright annihilate the NCR, to show the effect one man can have in history. Now, it's just not nations that make it, but countless individuals who oppose or support nations, or maybe even do nothing at all, but still affect the world and the history of the world. It's no coincidence his DLC is last, right before the Courier will go and fight at Hoover Dam, and the consequences there will ripple throughout all of history. New Vegas doesn't want us to think the only good choice is Wildcard, but at the same time I feel like it strongly, very strongly, points the player towards the idea that history isn't something to cling to, that it's something to be learned from, not obsessed over. Trying to recreate history never works. New conditions mean that the crossing of the Rubicon will not happen again. History never truly repeats. Every replay will be a little different, adapted to new circumstances. There are very, very new circumstances in the world of Fallout, and that begs the question. Is it time to let go of the old, of America? Can America function in this new post-apocalyptic world? Could idealized totalitarianism of a state older than any living being's memory be the key? Could another go with the American dream be worth it? Autocratic, despotic, technocratic rule. Maybe the world just needs one person with their gun and a dream of independence in their hearts. Who knows? I don't. And I find this fitting, that New Vegas's major themes are about history, and specifically about how people can cling to it and hold themselves back, either by their own past or the past they want to return to. After all, Obsidian was given the final hurrah to make a Fallout game. After New Vegas, it wasn't likely Bethesda would just hand the rights back or something. And now they've moved on. They made Outer Worlds, a game that my laptop is too shitty to play, but a game that's distinct from Fallout, with no relation to it or its world. One that's gotten major praise from almost all sectors of, the internet, all sections of the gaming community. It's different. And that's right. It feels right that they wouldn't want to make another Fallout. So maybe it's for the best that Obsidian will probably never go back to Fallout. And given the state of the franchise, seems like there's an entirely different company that might need to let go soon.
Last tape, last message. In case you best me. If you're hearing this, you have, through blood or word, this message and all that lies with it. It is for you, Courier. If you want to know the why of things. This world, I've walked a good part of it. I stopped only because of you. What you did gave me pause. Long ago, I crossed the Colorado, the first among the Legion to see Hoover Dam in all its glory. An old world wall, yet bridging two sides. And beyond it, a symbol of a two-headed bear. An idea great enough to challenge Caesar himself. Might kill him taking it, whether he won or lost. The bull needs to fight, needs the challenge. Without it, it falters, dies in the dust. Might be a lesson there, in you and me. Leave the thought behind the message to you. My message is this. The destruction that has been wrought at the Divide, or elsewhere, if you couldn't stop me, carry it on your back and wear it proudly when you stand at Hoover Dam.